Eliza Mae, no going back. I died in a car crash, just a few yards from the motel, on the road right there at the intersection, so close to home. I wasn't paying attention. It was my fault. I was in Zanny's truck because my car needed some brake work done. Zanny said to take the truck. I never liked driving that thing. You sit up too high from the road. The guy who hit me says he saw me stop at the stop sign. I came to a complete stop, looked both ways, looked up at him like I saw him, stared right at him, in fact, and then looked straight ahead and pressed on the gas. He just couldn't stop. He was in a big blue and white 18-wheeler. Those big trucks are hard to stop just like that. He hit me and split Zanny's truck right in half. The front with me in it went flying into the median. It was all like a split-second dream where I had disappeared, planning to come back, but then realized all at once that I wasn't going to be coming back. You know that feeling? How when something terrible or just plain stupid happens, you imagine that if you could just stop right there and jump back in time a little bit, and none of it would have ever happened. I remember once I had opened a bag of frozen strawberries that had thawed out. I wanted to separate the juice from the berries and use them both, but for some reason, I took out a colander, cut open the bag, and then poured the whole thing into it without a bowl underneath to catch the juice. So all that juice went right down the drain. I stared into that sink and couldn't believe what I had just done. Right there, I thought, let's go back 2 seconds. 2 seconds, and my mind would have correctly registered what I was doing. And I needed that strawberry juice. I can't believe how simple it would have been for me to just stay put at that stop sign. But your mind's on something else. You can't go back. It's done. All in an instant. There's no going back. I didn't feel any pain, if that's what you're wondering. It's what everybody says after an accident like that. At a funeral and to themselves, she died instantly. Instantly. Didn't suffer, didn't feel a thing. That gives them comfort. They can't know that I did indeed feel something. No one wants to think of such a thing, but I actually felt in that split second as that big truck was crashing into me, splitting me and my truck in two, my body being thrown in the air. I felt very cold. My skin was crawling all over me. My lungs went empty. My eyes popped wide open. My bones. I felt in that second every one of my bones. But then just as quickly, right away, I felt warm. My heart was full. My head was clear. All my thoughts had flown away, like startled birds. And my feet, for the first time in years, both of them were warm, very warm. And then nothing. So yes, ultimately I did feel nothing. I feel nothing now. It's a feeling I'd known for a long, long time before I ended up in that ditch. So many years ago, it wasn't like that for me. I felt everything around me all the time. I had my kids and my sweet mama. That should have been plenty for anybody. But on top of all that, I also had this beauty shop here for 10 years. And those 10 years, I have to say, were hard. You stand on your feet all day for 9 or 10 hours, 5 days a week, Tuesdays through Saturdays, then go home to a house full of hungry people. But those 10 years, the best years of my life. It wore me out, but looking back, I loved it. Thank God for my beauty shop. For me, it was an escape. Outside of this shop, in public situations, I'd get so nervous around people, but here in this shop, I felt safe. I was in charge. This was my world. And my beauty shop ladies, my customers, my friends, kept me laughing, kept me involved and connected. Happiest 10 years of my life. All at once, running my own shop, then getting home to all those kids. You have so many, like I did, the older ones are able to take care of the younger ones. That's why my beauty shop was even possible. They all grew up so fast, and in no time, it seems, they were old enough to take care of themselves and run that motel when they weren't at school. That was a big help. Every morning when I came in around 8, I opened the door using just one skeleton key. That's all the security we needed in those days, one key. As the customers came in, there was always something to talk about. And that's the secret of a good shop. You need to be good with those scissors, but what you really need is the ability to listen. You have to provide a good ear if you're going to be successful. And boy, did I listen. When those ladies sat in one of my chairs, I wasn't just doing their hair. I was their psychiatrist, their priest, their best friend. For that hour or so each week anyway. And you can believe that over those 10 years standing on my feet all day, I heard some stories. It's funny, I had no problem listening to the troubles of my ladies in the shop, but I never said a word about my own troubles at home. I was never one to talk about that kind of stuff with them, or anybody really. They needed me to have somebody to talk to. There was no place for my problems in all those conversations, so I kept it all to myself all those years. The only person I could tell any of it to was my mama. My parents had two boys, my brothers Payas and Florence, and then me. We were all children of that Great Depression. Daddy was a blacksmith and Mama did odd jobs when she could find something. We were dirt poor, but I don't think we knew it at the time. Our mama, like all good mamas, had no limits when it came to making sure that we had what we needed. She made us cornbread, or if we were lucky, bouillole, to take to school in our lunch pails. Bouillole has three ingredients. It's flour, milk, and sugar, cane sugar, cooked into a thick pudding. Sometimes if there was nothing in the house to sweeten it, it would be just the cooked flour and milk. By lunchtime, the bouillole had formed a skin on top that you could lift with a pinch. That was my favorite part. Wasn't very nutritious, but it would fill us up and get us through the day. When I was 9, Mama tore up bed sheets to make a uniform so I could play on the girls' softball team. Isn't that something? When I was 15, my high school dance was coming up in a few months. During the war, it was mostly girls at school, so we'd still have our dance, but with no boys around, we'd dance with each other. Of course, there was no money to make me a dress so I could go, and sheets just wouldn't have been right. So over a couple of weekends, Mama and I picked the leftover cotton in the harvested fields outside of town and sold that to buy just enough fabric. She was a whiz at sewing, using that old wrought iron singer. I could still hear the clack, clack, clacky, clack of her cranking up and down on that foot pedal. After some back and forth, the finished dress fit me perfectly. It was blue and white floral print with a fitted bodice and a full skirt. And don't you know that after all that, when I went to press the dress for the first time, I took the iron off the fire on the stove and burnt a big old scorch right on front of the skirt. My heart sank. Mom and I cried and cried. I wasn't going to be able to go to my dance. And it was another one of those times in my life I wish I could just jump back in time for one split second. But no, there it was, a big brown burn mark on that cotton-picking dress. And don't you know, the vision of that iron mark burned into my new dress still burns in my mind. Anyway, it all ends okay. Payas was still over in Europe, but when he got word of it, he sent money to buy enough fabric to fix the dress. And I went to my dance. All those years later, when I was going through my troubles with Zanny, my mom and I cried together again. She knew how helpless I was feeling. She knew my disappointment. When I married Zanny, Mama and I both had expected a very different life would come for me. He was so handsome and solid. He made a good impression on Mama and Daddy. Daddy saw something in him that gave him confidence that he would take care of me. I saw that too. Zanny was going to take me out to see the world. The war had taken him overseas, and he traveled all over. And that's what we had talked about in the early days before we were married, seeing the world. He wanted to show me where he'd been, but this time under peaceful circumstances. And we'd go to new places together. That's the life I thought I would be living. I was working at G. Ardwan's department store in Ville Platte, doing the books and sometimes working at the register. Zanny came into the store one day and started to talk to me. I was so shy, but he was good looking and I was flattered. Next thing you know, we're married and with my first baby, Cassie, on the way. And boy, did time fly by. After Cassie, Andy, and the twins were born, we moved to Eunice. Zanny used his savings from his Army pay and the work he did with the Merchant Marine and at Standard Oil. He had saved $11,000. And with that money, he bought us a car, a 3-bedroom house on Vine Street in Eunice, and a little Esso station on Laurel Avenue. Can you imagine buying all that with $11,000 these days? In units, I could take care of the kids and do the books at the station, and I was glad to be away from Ville Platte. So, to move things along, I'll tell you, I had a couple more babies. After the twins, Gilda and Glenda, I had Morris and Dickie. I went to beauty school somewhere in between all that mothering and baby having, and after I finished, we bought the little house next door to us, and that became this shop. I had the shop all set up and was in business for about a year when I got pregnant with my seventh child, Thomas. That pregnancy was like every child that came after Cassie. I was filled with happiness. By the time I had Thomas, I knew what to expect. I had organized baby clothes, set up the crib again, and crocheted some new booties and a matching blanket for him. When I woke up in the hospital room after the delivery, my focus was all blurry as usual. But as I was coming around, I saw Zanny's face first. It didn't look good. You know your husband's face better than your own. He was shaking his head. Before I could say anything, Dr. Derwine says, Eliza, I have some news. He had encephalitis. That's when the brain is swollen and the head is deformed. The rest of him was okay, but encephalitis in those days was nearly always fatal. The hospital wasn't advanced enough to help him properly. He wasn't going to make it past a day or two. I was numb. I never got to hold him. He was under a breathing machine the whole time and had tubes in his little arms. I only got to see him briefly a couple of times, and I touched his little chest. But I never got to hold him in my arms. That was for the best, they said. How do they know what's for the best? It wasn't for my best. Looking back, I know that I should have insisted on holding him at least once. I don't care what they think. I don't care what he looked like, but Zanny agreed with them, and so we went home the next day without our little boy. At the funeral, I was so weak. We buried him at St. Paul's Cemetery on the other side of town. He was all alone there. I hated that. It's a good thing, of course, that no one in our family had died up until then, but still he was there in that cemetery all alone. We had a closed casket for him. I had given the people at the funeral home the little booties and the blanket I had crocheted for him so he would have something from his mama with him. Looking down at that little gravesite all by itself in a row of adult-sized graves is probably the saddest thing I've ever seen in my life. I wanted to be there with him. I didn't want him to be alone like that. I tried my best to get past it, to move on, but nothing around you, not your husband, not your children, not your work, nothing really helps you get through the loss of a baby. Even several years later, I kept thinking, I should be rocking my baby. 6 months, a year passes. He should be crawling around now. I was so empty. It was the most horrible time in my life. I don't remember how long it was before I started getting back to my life, but I can tell you, losing a child changes you forever. I would wish that on no one. Time passes, of course, and you do move on. You have to.